Okay, so now we're going to move on to session 5, our last session of the meeting. And it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, David Legler. He's the director of the Global Ocean Monitoring and Observing Program, or GOMO. And despite the fact that Camille reported that Group 4 already solved this issue, he's going to talk about the National Execution Plan for Coastal Observing for Climate. And yeah, we look forward to your perspective, David. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil, and good morning. So I was asked to provide on behalf of the Interagency Ocean Observation Committee. I have to get the name right because it's always confusing, and I would thank you for the correction, Krista. And so I'm going to provide a little bit of the context before sort of get to the question around the execution. And so a couple, I think, overarching messages. One is we've been the Interagency Ocean Observation Committee. I'll get it right here. The IOC has been catalyzing a lot of this effort out of interest on behalf of the agencies. So I hope that by the end of the chat this morning and the discussions that you'll get a sense that we're here to try to respond to the needs and requests and recommendations from you all. We're doing our best to bring agencies together to the table. Seth just mentioned, this interagency space is a space we occupy. It can be very effective in bringing voices together, bringing resources together, and we're trying to use the IOC and make it very action-oriented. So I hope that message comes across, and we're very keen to, hear what you have to say, and we'll talk a bit more about that. And so the IOC is, I'll talk a little bit more about the context of that, but I think today I'm representing the IOC co-chairs. I'll talk about who those are. It's myself from NOAA, Laura Lorenzoni from NASA, who may be able to join us, Lisa Clow from National Science Foundation, and Darren Babrot, who's from the White House from the administration side from OSTP. So those are the current co-chairs. We have over 11 agencies at the table. We meet fairly regularly, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. So just a little bit of context of the history of this activity. We've been recognizing that the climate signal on the coast is something that's really important. And while it's one of the 7 or so, I think, impact areas that IOOC was formed to sort of support and address through its development of that sort of coastal observing system, the climate signal is pervading everything. And we felt it was important and a good opportunity to motivate and learn a bit about where we are in addressing this climate signal, how the impacts are being, addressed through the development of that observing system, and what we could do to further advance the ocean observing activities in the coastal space to detect those signals using the expertise of all the interested parties who could contribute to that enterprise. And so 3 years ago now, in 2021, there were 2 separate reports done, one by US CLIVAR, so Mike and his team, and bringing in the scientific community, and then the IOOC Regional Association also put together a report, and those were in your background documents that I'm sure you all read. And so it's taken us a little while to kind of get to look at those. And one of the things that we did is we formed a task team to look at this topic, and we gave them some objectives and deliverables, and I won't give you all of those. But I'll simply point to the bottom line here, which is, what's going to happen post-workshop. And so we're asking the task team to take some action following this workshop to look at your recommendations and to develop a sort of action plan for how we can address those recommendations. And if you're wondering who's on that task team, and I'm not sure how many of the members you remember they're on the task team, there have been 7 or 8 of the task team members participating in the meeting this week, representing 8 different agencies, 7 different agencies, sorry, and our staff who have been helping us incredibly well. And so we're here to represent not only our own agency and our own program interest, but the broader interest of the nation and as represented in the IOC. So I hope that the task team members recognize themselves, and we're going to have a lot of work to do following this workshop. And if you're interested in serving on a task team, please let us know. We can, most of these are all agency people, but so I know some of the agency people are in the meeting today or online, and so we can always use more. A little bit about the IOOC. So we sit in this space of governmental bodies right there in the middle. So we're in the center of action, if you will. Um, so we respond and report to the executive office agencies through OSTP. We are advised by the IU's advisory committee. They report and advise not only NOAA, but also the IOOC. We represent and are comprised of representatives from all the agencies that you might think of that do ocean observing. So it's NASA, NOAA. I mean, all of the list, I can't even list them all, right? There's a bunch of them. You can go to our webpage and find out what they are. We meet regularly to try to advance the ocean observing system at the coast, at the global scale, at Great Lakes level. I mean, all of those kinds of things. We're at the table trying to push forward that agenda. So in terms of the timeline of what's going to happen, I provide a little bit of the context. So we've been working through this task team, organizing the workshop. So one of the things we're expecting to have happen starting, once the workshop ends, is that we will be looking forward to receiving the recommendations from the workshop. We will reconvene the task team who will look at those recommendations, and we're going to be asking them to, again, develop this sort of working plan or action plan, if you will, to help us develop and devise the follow-on activities. And that task team will be working very closely with the member agencies of the IOOC to further figure out how we're going to support and resource those particular set of activities. So the workshop this week, I think, met all of our expectations. When we were chatting about the workshop this week. We were hoping that the workshop would address these sets of topics. And to your credit, through the discussions, through the report out, to even the recommendations this morning, many of those thoughts that we were hoping the workshop would address, you've checked those boxes. So thank you for that. We've been trying to put a little hand on the discussions and scoping, and so we're very appreciative of those discussions and bringing to bear, the discussions or recommendations on those topics. One of the new opportunities we have is the IOC has been around a while. We've never had a strategic plan, so we've issued just in the past 3 months the IOOC's first strategic plan. You can find it on our webpage. You can Google it and find it. It's relatively brief read. It's bulletized form. It speaks to 3 goals: ocean observing system development, partnership engagement, and ocean observing sustainability. And under that, there are some objectives and some more details. You can read those offline. One of the things that we are trying to do is propose and stimulate, catalyze action under each of those goals. So this is great timing to have this workshop and have some recommendations. And what's really nice is that what many of the topics and themes that are coming through are aligned very nicely with our strategic plan goals. So for example, the many of the items on the left, and these were just my late night ruminations on some of the things I heard about, and they even became more evident this morning. We talked about the importance and why are we discussing the climate signal on the coast. So, and then trying to crystallize the vision. We all get it. We have to take action, but we have to put some plans in place and develop some plans and activities and actions to go forward to really crystallize that vision. And just, building on what we have, sustaining that effort, but also thinking about something bigger, something more national in scope. Enhancing, we heard a lot about the scope of the observations that are regarded from the nearshore to the offshore, taking full advantage of other activities, for example, in the global ocean observing arena. Developing or addressing the gaps, optimizing what we have or what we don't have. I recognize it's also very difficult to optimize something you don't really have at present. And so optimize can be, I think of optimizing as if you have a lot of observations, you can optimize them. And what you don't have, you can rationalize or motivate. And maybe that's the right set of words to think about. The modeling and reanalysis tools were talked about this morning a lot, and yesterday. I really appreciate those coming in. I think there's a broad recognition of the wide range of number of partners that could come to the table to help. So very pleased this week to see communities like the satellite community, the modeling community, we're here a little bit, the global observing community, we're here. So thank you for that. And we think those will be very helpful. New technologies are also important, so we hope to see that engagement, and there's some words to that effect, I think, in the recommendations. And we are also very excited to read about the co-design or co-production of knowledge and how important that is. So again, just a number of themes that sort of came to us, and they align very nicely with sort of the our strategic plan and the how we're proceeding to go forward. So a few thoughts from the co-chairs and some of the directions here, and I got my little separate notes here. Again, the importance of communication and the messaging motivating the activities in the coast to detect the climate signals and take action and provide actionable information to those who can use it is important. And so I know that was discussed in various places, and I think that's really important. So let's not forget that. Again, a national effort is required, a step change in this level of investment, the level of coordination, and I think the strategy here. Let's think about that national kind of effort. And that can take different shapes depending on how we think about that next, but think about that national effort. We're going to be using the task team, so there's lots of action going to be required. The task team is going to be one of the key groups who are going to take that, develop the sort of next steps, but it's also going to require some action on the part of the communities you all represent, the individuals like you all from the experts in the field. And so we're likely to see, I would suspect, and we would welcome your recommendations on how the communities who are engaged in actually executing can help take action. So we would welcome some recommendations there. And finally, just a word of acknowledgement, thanking you all for the thoughts and inputs to the various recommendations and discussions this week. I think they've met very well our sense of what we wanted to get out of this workshop. And again, thinking about our plan, we're very excited to try to take forward, these recommendations to the best of our ability, or at least provide a place for discussion about what that action could look like. Okay, so we're here to support you, and we really appreciate your thoughts and input. With that, guess I'll turn it over for thoughts or questions. And I'm not sure if Lisa or Laura online, if they have anything else to offer.
Hello, everyone. Okay, great. So David did a great job. I'm Lisa Clow from National Science Foundation, one of the co-chairs. I want to reassure that we are very much in yes and space. So yes, we need to do all of this, and wouldn't it be nice if we had all the money in the world to do all of this? But y'all might recognize that we don't have all the money in the world, although we do have good chunks that we can do good things with. So I would welcome some prioritization thoughts, recognizing that regions may have very different observational needs, and we have to have space for that. But that's the only thing I will add. And David, huge thanks to you for being there in person and and to everyone who is there in person and virtually doing all the hard work on behalf of the nation. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa.
Are there any direct questions for David?
All right. So, well, to me, the reason we get together like this, with all of our time we're spending and all the travel we've done is really to make a paradigm shift, to change things in a fundamental way. It's not to reorganize. It's not to do that. It's not to rearrange the deck chairs. I just wonder how welcome would be a really bold vision of how we might do something different, because that's what I got to say is most interesting to me.
So Dan, thank you for that comment. So I think grand visions, or BHAG, as we talked about earlier in the week, I think those are great in motivating or inspiring us to plan on and setting up, like I said, crystallizing that vision a little bit. I think taking these bold steps, we have to remember the message for those large scale, visionary kind of things like a stepwise change factor of 3 or 5 or 10, whatever that might be. The audience for that is not necessarily the agencies, it's Congress and those who are appropriating dollars to agencies. The agencies would love to be supportive of that, and we will be supportive to the best of our ability within our agencies, but there's limited ability for us, recognizing that within our own agencies, we fight as best we can for the resources we can devote to this. But it requires help from others on the outside to make, we can help make that case as best we can within the constraints we have, but we would really benefit from the others on the outside to help make that case. So it's helpful to just keep in mind that who the audience is and who that should be targeted to. Sure. But, we also have to think rationally about what we can take action on in the next few years, which hey, if we get that big stepwise change, okay, great. Well, we need a plan for that. It's like the chicken and egg. If you don't have the plan or don't have the vision ready and somebody asks for it, you're going to miss that opportunity. So I've always found that it's helpful to have something right in your back pocket, but just understand that reality is those opportunities may not come very often, but let's be ready.
So the summary I take it is, we don't expect it to happen next year, but to have it in the back pocket is really the goal at this time, so that we can make the opportunity happen in some future.
I would say so, but again, I think also keep in mind that the ask here from the workshop is let's define some actionable things we can also take some action on in the next few years to try to get us further down the road in terms of defining the observing system we need to get into place, the steps we could take to develop those plans, to, some measurable things we can do now.
Thanks.
Can I opine for a second here, David?
Oh yeah, sure. Lisa will have her own views, right? And other agencies
Great.
will as well. Go ahead.
No, they're mostly in line, and Dan, I do thank you for the willingness to think big. I will say that there are a million reports out there that we certainly have to pay attention to for the interagency produced reports. I think that the community, right, like you guys do have national academies sorts of reports to draw on in this space. I will note that maybe we don't quite have a decadal plan like might exist for, I don't know, the astrophysics community and other communities along those lines. NSF has asked for a redo of our decadal plan, and that will be coming out in 2025. So we will have sort of something to look at. And I know other agencies did certainly contribute to the NSF decadal plan, but it is sort of specific. So I do see that maybe there is room for some sort of thing. I totally agree with David that it is not necessarily us, the agencies, that plan should be speaking to, but we would be paying attention to. And I think that something in conjunction with the national academies who have certainly produced plans on ocean observing that have been very impactful is one way forward. But you guys could postulate, is there some other way to present a unified community voice on the bottom up drivers of the needs for coastal ocean observing? Thanks.
Thank you. Josie Quinchell, I'm just following up on Dan's remark. The paradigm shifts have happened when you have the agencies, Congress, and the community coming together. And I actually thought this was the meeting that was going to do what she was just talking about. But we need the vision and the leadership coming from the agencies, because if you go to Congress, the first thing they're going to say to anybody from the community is, what does NOAA, NSF, NASA think of this? So we really need all three of them coming together. And I do think we do need this BHAG coming out of it. Those goals are fantastic, but is where are we headed and where are we going? And I think there's some urgency, and this is the opportunity we have before us. So we actually do need the agencies to come forward and put out a vision, and then we can move forward. It doesn't have to have all the plans down to the nth degree, but kind of this is where we are and this is where we need to go, and go forth community and make it happen. It's not going to happen overnight, but we need that from you. So.
Okay, thank you, Josie.
Hi, Megan Medina with SCOOS, and I'm actually going to echo, I agree with Josie, as someone who goes to the Hill and talks to staffers. I've heard this question or request before. But my initial comment was actually, I appreciate you putting together some major themes within the workshop so far. It seems to be missing, and maybe it's intentional, but there's something about biodiversity and ecosystem health up there. But it's also, it seems a little vague, which maybe that's okay where we are right now. Like, what observations do we need enhanced? Like, what adjust climate signal gaps? What are those? And I know we're on day 3. I'm just hoping to get a little bit further and figure out what those are.
So appreciate the comment. I totally own the themes right here, and I'll be the first to admit, writing these down late at night.
I appreciate you putting it together, though.
I'm sure there's many I missed and misstated, so I'll take the hit on that one. So I would much defer to the workshop report to pick out these themes, but anyway, and so your point, so we'll take it. So, if there's themes missing, biodiversity sure is missing, and I'm sure there are a few others.
Hi, Jan Newton, NANUS director. I just want to jump on the theme that was initiated by Dan and followed up by Josie. I think we really do have an amazing opportunity at this juncture. And this workshop has pulled together a lot of people. You have the federal agencies, you have regional association directors and PIs within that. You have Pisces, you have a lot of scientists who are engaged in the ocean observing practices. And I think that it really is a pivotal time. I think that the effects from coastal climate change are only going to grow. And I think that we have the ability, I like how Josie said, when you have the three, the agency, the community, and what was the third one? Congress. Yes, thank you. And getting to that, which was the gist of what I wanted to say, is recognizing the strengths when we work together. So I want to underscore that when the president's budget cut the IOOC regional line, 1,000 signatures came together very rapidly, 600 from people who could lobby, 400 from people who couldn't, i.e. feds, right? And that is the power that we can bring to bear. That is the power that and I know you know this, David, but I really want to underscore how powerful it is when we have a similar song page to sing off of. And that came out of Ocean Obs 19. And I think that for us to come together as a nation and to spell out that BHAG vision, I don't really like that acronym, but that big vision to show what we need. I think the time is right. Lisa, I hear you. We need to also have those things that we can do in the near term. And I think creating a broader awareness of what each other are doing is really valuable as well. Like I heard oh, we didn't know that those models existed, right? Oh, we didn't know that you were doing this. There's the Cephi, there's IOOC, there's Pisces. There's a lot of things that we can connect the dots on and work together as a stronger community. So I really hope we recognize the gravitas of this opportunity that we stand at right now. Thank you.
Dirty. Thank you, Jan. Oh, Lisa, you have your hand up. Is that a legacy hand or a new hand?
Yeah, I put it up and I took it down and I put it up. But given that Jan called me out in a way, I would put it back on you guys in that, are there two things? Okay, and 2 is a hard number. But could you get to, we must observe 2 things over the next 5 years, right? Like we're going to observe everything. I want to reassure everyone that we are going to observe everything. So we're not going to put all the money into these 2 things. But can you guys, as the community, seize the moment to say, yeah, we really do have to go all in on biodiversity first and foremost for the next sort of couple years. I welcome decadal thinking, and obviously I did put the decadal reports out as game changers. But I think to get all of us on the same page, it's hard because we have so many different interests to go through a prioritization exercise. But I would sort of put back on you guys, is there sort of the pitch, the elevator pitch that we can make to everyone to all get on the same page behind? And if it's 5 things, it's probably at least one or two too many. It needs to be 100 things. Totally acknowledge that. But is there a way to get to a couple things? We, quite frankly, are going to go there as the agency to try and figure out, can we get to a couple priorities? So it would be super helpful for us to hear from you guys. Are there a couple, and maybe two is too few, but I will assert that five is too many when we're doing prioritizations. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Dev. I do have a question for Sash. Concern about interagency collaborations, which came as a discussion topic in most of the breakout session. So my question is, like Seth here pointed out in the morning, like there is successful stories in Arctic and Antarctic where agencies collaborate. So my question is that this Arctic and Antarctic are like strategic dependencies there where you have to have that collaboration. You cannot do it alone. But whereas if you take another place like Gulf or West Coast or East Coast, this agency can do their own work where this collaboration may not be really needed. So what my thought is, like, how is going to be playing out in future, like when it comes to the interagency collaboration in those regions? Like, I'm not sure who will take a lead, but how that will play out. Thanks.
Good question. So the question is around how do we sort of extend the model of an Arabic kind of model that Seth was talking about into regions in the context of the IOC. So it's a fair question. I might reach out to my colleague Krista in a minute to put her on the spot while I fill the air. But so I think it's a fair question. I think the IOC has traditionally not gone, well, we have gone into some level of detail of particular observing systems, for example, the tracking network, gliders and other things. I don't know that we've had much discussion around sort of regional focus areas. I don't know, Krista, do you have any reaction to that? Whether that might make sense. I mean, the IOC is a vehicle to have sort of discussions around needs or topics. I don't know, maybe that's something we can explore. Don't know. Yeah, I don't think we've done that. Not that I recall. So it's a good comment. Thank you.
Before we take another in-room question, we have one from online. The question was, how did NOAA get TPAWS 2020 to happen, since it seems like it's a kind of similar effort?
Oh boy. Okay. Well, you're asking the right person. So TPAWS, the Tropical Pacific Observing System, was a 5+ year effort brought on by a catastrophe of the collapse of the Tau array. So there's 55 moorings that NOAA supports in the tropical Pacific that provide some of the foundations for forecast skill for subseasonal and longer predictions. In 2013, the array fell into sort of disrepair because of lack of ship time. So we initiated a multinational effort to rethink the entire observing strategy for the tropical Pacific. And the successes were that the entire array got recapitalized. Ship time was provided by NOAA. We brought in new technologies and are currently still assessing those technologies. There are, let's see what else. We increased the density of the Argo array a little bit, but there was a whole new design for that observing system. And it sort of took an interesting approach that the team, I supported it, but it was a scientific multinational team. And they looked at asking the questions, much like what you all did yesterday, what are the signals you're trying to discern? What variables do you need? And then what platforms are optimal? And we explicitly considered satellite data as one of the foundations for that observing system, and reckon because we know that they can leave or change or in time, but a lot of them are probably here to stay. Sorry, Michelle, but and so that system, that TPAWS effort, really designed a whole new observing strategy based on that sort of framework. So it's not too dissimilar for what we're talking about here, but there was a very structured set of conversations on, again, similar to what some of the words we heard this week. What are the signals you're trying to detect? What are the variables you need? What are the platforms that are going to work best? What are the trade-offs you're going to accept? And I think that was one of the keys is we were working with an observing system that existed. This case, you're looking at building a system that really doesn't exist. So it's a little bit different. So you have really great opportunity to think about what the system could look like. Sure, go ahead.
I just like to acknowledge and emphasize Jan's remarks and something that we saw in one of the report outs, that this community is bigger than the science that you all bring. And as the token non-scientist here, I really want to emphasize what Jan said about how do we take this, and whether we have 3 priorities or 5, some of those priorities need to be aligned with who you have to speak on behalf of this and what they bring to the conversations. Because when you walk the halls of Congress, they need to hear and see an absolute application for this. They need to know who it's affecting, what problem is it solving or gaining information towards. And that is a huge component of that. And you cannot do that in the 11th hour. That has to be woven through the entire system of what you want to bring forward. And it may be that you have to think about it in phases. You may have to think about who are your champions and when are they potentially leaving office? When are they getting their chairmanships? Because all of that, if you lay it all out and you let it kind of present a constellation, that's when it works. And none of it can be done at the 11th hour. So I'm really thankful that I was here for these 2.5 days. I have to go unscramble my brain, but I'd love to stay in contact with this group. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for the words. All right, Seth, go ahead.
I'd like to respond just briefly to Lisa's question about what is this vision that we're trying to rally around. And in my mind, it's actually fairly simple. We want to understand the status of the ecosystem because that's what the people along the coasts care about. That's what the public cares about. It's not about the scientific questions. It's about what the public is interested in. If the Bristol Bay salmon fishery, which has been doing fantastically for many years, if that has a collapse, we need to be able to answer the question as to why that collapse has happened. Is it happening in the ocean? Is it happening in the streams? Is it happening due to climate or something else? There's a lot of examples from Alaska I can give you. The bowhead whale has been doing really, really well. At some point, the trajectory of the population is not going to be only upwards. We need to be able to be in a position to identify what's going on with the habitat. And by getting the ecosystem right, you also have to get the physical environment right. You have to understand the biogeochemical environment. So everything that we're doing well right now with the Argo floats and the glider deployments is key to also understanding the ecosystem. So I think we do need that elevator pitch, and it's been something I've been sort of looking for through the meeting, and that's what I would rally around because that's what I talk about in my work all the time.
Great. It goes back to the discussions around the bigger vision here, and I think ecosystems are again one of those important areas we need to bring into that. Yep.
Hi, Camille Paniello, University of Hawaii at Manoa. So I've kind of been hearing 2 trains of thought. Well, overall, everyone I think in this room says we need more observations, but how we go about that is either, for some people, more of the same. So more gliders, more moorings, more CTD profiles, more ships. And then there's another group saying we need to think differently of instrument scuba divers, put stuff on small boats that are already there, put stuff on animals. From an agency perspective, which of those is going to be most kind of transformational and be more receptive as to get funding to actually increase those observations? Because I think I think there needs to be new directions and merge them with the existing ones, but I can see voices in the room overpowering others. So I'm just curious.
That's the fun of scientific and other discussions, right? So to your question, which is great, thank you for asking it. I think there are different appetites and different approaches to ocean observing depending upon the agency. And that's why at least I think within the IOC, it's great to have that all the agencies are at the table. So you have agencies like ONR, right? So they're not here, but they're interested. They're at the table. They invest a lot in technology development, as does NSF, right? NOAA does a little bit too. We have laboratories represented here. They do a lot of that. So there are various constituencies all saying they have solutions, and we're trying to find the right space to have all of that. It's a really rich part. We have to develop new capabilities, assess new technologies. The private sector has space, they have capabilities. So I think that's what we're advocating here for is let's bring all those, possibilities to the table, but we're gonna have to figure out how to frame the conversation on what do we need to invest in, how do we invest that, and come up with a best solution, or several lines of effort, as I like to call it, right?
Hi, Alex Harper, Suncoos. I'll make a couple of comments because I feel like we're getting into the discussion portion here, but I'll try to keep it brief. Sort of building on the last remarks about the observations, I found that putting new instruments in the water, or at least procuring those instruments, is sort of the easier part. The data integration, accessibility, and then the information product development piece, particularly through co-design, is quite challenging. And there are few of us in this room, I'm finding, who are engaged in that work, although sort of more than I anticipated. Of the research community are engaging with end users. When I hear this like call to action, David, about what are these like actionable things that can come out of this, I get a little bit concerned because, my program in Central and Northern California is so small. Of the four, I guess 5 of us, 3 of us are data scientists, data specialists, which is unique. We have these data wranglers in the region who are focused on working with PIs, with monitoring teams to get data more accessible. And that's an important and often unappreciated and underfunded activity. And so I just want to highlight that here. In terms of like collaborative networks that Margaret spoke about and others raised this morning, the example of IARPIC is a great one. I feel like a fisheries entity, so this connection with the commercial and recreational fishing fleet is sort of a right partnership, and we could do better in sort of understanding which groups are leading in this space regionally and nationally and bringing them into our group. And then I think one way to get at this decadal plan is around identifying the climate signals of most importance across the nation, and then building, observing systems to address those specific climate signals. We've done some of that, I think, and could take it all the way. Okay, I'll end there. Thank you.
So Alex, thanks for those comments. So I couldn't agree more on the importance of data wranglers, data wrangling, and making accessibility a key, pillar of what we should be delivering, right? Because without that accessibility and access to information and knowledge, we're not going to realize the benefits of all this investment. So couldn't agree more. It should be just an analogy. So in the Global Ocean Observing System, when we started those efforts 30 years ago, one of the key goals and requirements was all the data had to be reported, or as much data as possible had to be reported in real time and had to get to the forecast centers. We didn't know how to do it at the time. We had telecommunication systems were just beginning, global telecommunication systems were just beginning to become a thing. And so we had to figure that out. We had to work with groups like the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, to get data into pipelines. But in the end, that investment paid off enormously. And all of those data are now the pillar of ocean knowledge for all the forecast and products that we use. In fact, just this past week, we learned through some probing at NOAA that the Argo system supports nearly 600 different products and services at NOAA. And for the Argo system, it's one of the great achievements of oceanography, I would say. And so the number, it's all of the products and services at NOAA except for one. And that one is space weather. So if anybody knows how to use Argo for space weather, come talk to me at coffee hour, because I'd love to have a perfect record. But I think, again, that access to data and access to that information was one of the keys to success. And so I your message is I think, really important. Okay, I'm not sure.
Do we have anything online or? Okay, just wanted to make sure that I'm not hogging. Michelle Girak at NASA JPL. And I just wanted to sort of go back to the beginning, sort of the need for sort of having this grand vision, right? And I know that that in itself, we read a lot of those documents. And to Lisa's point, I think in association with that, which is always the difficult part, is the roadmap that speaks to those near term and long term. But if we do have a vision and can define that, then all the agencies can like jump on board and they're all working towards a common goal. So with respect to that roadmap, and Lisa, your point of 1 to 2, could we pick off? It might be disruptive. I'm going to reverse engineer this. Right now in the budget constraint that we are, you really need to get Congress support. So Jan, you mentioned when that happened, obviously people went forth and lobbied. So thinking, reverse engineering, what are the biggest groups right now that have the biggest lobbying footprint and the largest economic valuation? Again, not saying not all of them will be done, but at least for the initial time frame, finding out, let's say it's the squid, right? With respect to what do they need? What we've heard from Glenn is they need a lot more bottom topography or bottom observations. So if we had a way to sort of think about that, find out the observations they need, and that in fact could be our first sort of priorities that we tackle. So I know that that's not what we want to hear, but that's the kind of environment we're living in, and we got to play the game, right? Twist it that we can, but that's that. Sorry.
Great, thanks. I think, I've been trying to think about putting the pieces together with some of these gaps that we have. And something that comes up constantly are the different trophic levels and how are we going to get from BGC Argo, for example, up the trophic system? We've got pH, oxygen, nitrate, but then where are we going to get to fisheries and how are we going to get there? And something that I feel like in the future is going to be this amazing data set once we figure it out is eDNA. And I think the investment in the coordination, enhancing the technology, the sampling, and that can address so many needs. It can bridge across citizen science. It can be integrated into our models. I think it's something that we might want in 10 years to be good now. And I just kind of wanted to ask about, maybe the plans and the vision. And I don't know exactly, I don't work on eDNA, but it just seems like something extremely exciting that could maybe help be a conduit to our issues. So thanks.
Thank you, Jen, for raising that. I'm not an expert on eDNA either, so I'll let others comment. I know it dovetails with biodiversity and other topics, surely.
Just a quick comment on that. I'm far from an expert on eDNA, but trying to get up to speed. I echo everything Jen just said, particularly the point about if this is something we're going to want in 10 years, we need to start now. And I think even while we're working out some of the methodological issues, which are, my sense are improving rapidly, figuring out what the applications are and what they aren't. I think right now, and I'm not sure ever maybe, is eDNA going to have a meaningful contribution to stock assessments, for example? But I think for rare species detection, invasive species detection, just characterizing ecosystems, I think there's a lot of applications. But I think we need to start building up the time series now, even if we haven't figured out all of the applications. It has the benefit of collecting and archiving samples seems to be relatively cheap. So I think it's, and again, Jen made this point, I think it's a good way to engage local users and do citizen science. So really just reiterating everything she just said.
Since we're talking about the IOOC, and I appreciate the 3 N's being here, but I wanted to think a little bit about broadening that. And I think the representation is there for both Department of Homeland Security and Department of Interior. And I want to bring these up because I think thinking about broadening the impact. FEMA spends phenomenal amounts of money worrying about storm surges right now, and they have really made huge investments. This is an area where I think we could argue that the observing system we're talking about is going to impact people around the entire coastline of the US. And so in terms of thinking about a strategy going forward within the IOOC to argue within government about the breadth of impact of what we're talking about, it seems like that's a really potentially important one. Similarly, I think within Department of Interior, though I think they often don't have very good budgets, both BOEM and USGS are our partners again in this, where the broad impact, and especially with offshore wind and the challenge they're going to have in discerning impacts. I think that the challenge there is going to be very significant for the wind industry to argue that they're not the impact. Oh, it's climate change, having to tease that out. It's going to require very accurate measurements. And so just in terms of a strategy, I guess a question about their involvement to date in the IOC and the potential for bringing them in more closely as we think about developing a strategy.
Sure. Great. Thanks for the question. So I will note that BOEM was participating at least yesterday. Jonathan Blythe was on the call. I'm not sure who else might have been on the call, but I heard Jonathan's voice yesterday, so I know he was on the call. And they've been very active in our discussions in the IOC. So at least for some representation on the other agencies you mentioned, hopefully more, but it's the door is always open. So if you have some recommendation for us for program leads who might be interested, please, reach out to us and let us know who that might be.
And David's quite right. Jonathan is online, and I see
he's online. There you go.
So Jonathan.
Yeah, as nice as Denver is or Boulder is, not everybody could get here. So,
Jonathan, do you want to unmute and say a few words?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Jonathan.
All right. Thanks for bringing up the other agencies. DOI is composed of various agencies who have ocean interests, including USGS, their Coastal Hazards Group, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who we work with on migratory species and sea turtles, and also, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and our sister agency, Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. And a lot of the operational issues that you were talking about is actually a BSEE interest. So I know NOAA has started to have these discussions on like operational moorings in the Gulf of Mexico that are required under lease stipulations for oil and gas. There's also going to be similar lease stipulations for offshore wind. And I don't know, I don't have any insight or what the one or two things are we need to do for the coastal climate signal. But we are, I'll try to bring that message back to my agency. I'd appreciate, everybody reaching out to other DOI agencies, contacts that you work with, and bring them into this conversation. Since I have the microphone, can I just make one comment quickly? Just a personal reflection on the biodiversity connection. I think when you look at the coastal climate signal, there is, and we've heard from various speakers, a connection to fisheries, but I don't think you'd really call that biodiversity. I think we need to be a little more refined in our characterization of the ecosystem and what the climate signal is composed of. And I think we'll probably notice the fisheries impacts from climate change a lot quicker. Although the ranges of all species might be changing, it's going to affect us on the coast much more quickly if it's a species we consume that our livelihoods are based on. And so that's the kind of thinking I think we need to look to focus in on, because when you blow it up to biodiversity, there are a lot of other, it's not focusing, it's not helping with bringing this problem down to something more manageable. So just my opinion on that, but others, of course, may be from different agencies may have more insight on the biodiversity connections. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
I really thought Seth's comments were really important in terms of ecosystem impacts. And I think we've heard from several other people, Margaret and Michelle, about broadening our allies. There's an organization called the Seafood Harvesters Association that is a national commercial fishing lobbying organization. And the leader is Chris Brown from Rhode Island. So he's very aware of fisheries issues throughout the country. And I'm thinking that may be an organization that might be a useful ally. And I do want to say I've been very inspired by the quote on their website, which is in DC, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that's a useful message.
Thanks, Glenn.
I want to get back to our discussion a little bit about how the interagencies will be developing new programs and how we might have the observance system play a significant role in those new programs. I'm speaking towards the effort by a number of agencies, federal agencies now, developing carbon dioxide removal observing systems. And I think that the primary baseline for the comparisons of these two, of the observing system for carbon dioxide removal in the water column, will be our observing system that we have in place both in open ocean and in coastal waters. And so we'll be needing to work with the Department of Energy and the EPA and ourselves within NOAA to help facilitate the interactions between the groups so that we can employ the and continue to develop the observing system on the coast and open ocean to address that important issue.
Yes, Dick, I think, well, and there's lots of action and discussions around that marine CDR topic at different levels in the agencies and across the agencies. So I think that's one of the questions that the IOC is trying to grapple with, is how do we engage with those other entities and what would be our role in that space? So that's also on our list of things that we're also trying to wrestle with in the next year.
So I just would say, as we develop the observing system we have in mind, we need to keep that in mind because the spatial scales are very different. In the coastal region, the spatial scales would be quite small, at least initially, but there are experiments that are ongoing right now. But there are also very large scale experiments that are being planned in the open ocean in terms of biofertilization. So we have to be able to scale ourselves accordingly.
Hi, I was wondering how you see the whole value chain of the ocean observing community, from the decision makers to the community members and all the other important players, fit into the co-design, co-production of the strategic plan, and if they're included in the partner engagement section, and how you plan on going about doing that.
So it's a great question around the sort of the scope of the value chain and what's sort of in central to that. And okay, so my own personal perspective, and I will speak first to the IOC. So the IOC has been focused on observing to data and a little bit into the modeling space as motivated by, the wider value chain, if you will. I think we, as noted here, the increase of, and it's fairly important, I think, to be thinking more around that co-design and co-production, if you will, across our entire ocean observing domain. And so that's a shift and a trend we should continue to follow. We are discussing within the IOC, so how do we assess sort of social impacts, if you will? How do we even characterize that? And so there's some discussions. Jonathan Blythe has been sort of leading an effort in that space. So we're trying to grapple with that space and how to do that. And so I think that's a space you'll see us long-term try to move towards.
I guess I'm curious if you're planning to implement co-design principles in the drafting of the strategic plan, or if the strategic plan will suggest that co-design needs to happen in order for the implementation.
So in the IOC strategic plan as it's written, I don't know that the word co-design appears per se. And then I'm looking at Lisa to see if she remembers. I don't know I'm pretty sure the word doesn't appear, but certainly the discussions in the IOC that we've had discussions in vectoring in that direction. Okay, but we would need to partner with other groups to help, I think, realize and bring that entire value chain into the focus of, in the context of ocean observing.
Hi, David.
Hey, Nick.
In full disclosure, I also staff the IOC. So I just want to say, back to the list of federal members that we have on the task team, many of you are in the room. I would say that's not a final list either. To your point, Harvey, I think if you all have connections with other feds that might be interested in participating in this task team who weren't here, I think we should be open to adding to that list, particularly FEMA. That's an agency I think it would be great for us to connect with the right connection. So just a follow-up action for us. I'll put it on my to-do list.
My naivete. Can I ask a question? So it's a task team. of feds for the feds. Would there be openness to having non-feds as advisory to that? You know, like a couple of people on there that could provide a non-fed perspective? I mean, I feel like we stay siloed so often. And I feel that within IOOC, I think we oftentimes just talk to ourselves, the feds talk to themselves, and I'm not seeing much. So maybe there's some requirements why that's not possible.
Thank you, Jan. Ask me that question in the hallways during the break. No, no, the real answer is no. There's FACA rules, so we cannot have non-federal participants on there. In the past, we've had non-voting contributors to some of our efforts, but I do know that there are folks in the room who have federal status through advisory committees that we could potentially consider.
I'm just going to throw on that what Nick said is 100% correct, except IARPIC, and I will end there. So IARPIC has figured out a way to do that. It was not easy, but IARPIC did do that. So drawing on something that was raised earlier.
All right, this has been a great discussion. I think we'll cut it off there. Thank David very much for being in the hot seat for 30 minutes straight there. Thank you. So it's almost 10 o'clock. We're supposed to wrap this meeting up by 12:30. So it's about time we get to work and do what we're ultimately here to do, is get some recommendations together and come to consensus on those recommendations. So the breakouts yesterday were great, but we're going to, our plan for the next, well, till 10:30 is to send you back to the same breakout groups as you were in yesterday, end of the day yesterday. So look on the back of the agenda if you forgot where you were. And we're going to give you a very specific task now, and that is to, I'll show you in a minute how to get to this Google Doc. And for each breakout group, we want very specific recommendations written down. And we, in particular, first of all, this should not be a very long list. Keep your list to a reasonable length. I won't give you a number because scientists are terrible at sticking to numbers anyways. But think about both the long-term, very revolutionary, the BHAGs, and as well as the nearer term, really actionable recommendations to get us in the direction of those big ideas. So really separate that into, give us both. Give us your long-term big things and your near-term instructions. So the way we're going to do this, you're going to go back to the breakout groups, formulate those recommendations. You only have half an hour, so please work efficiently. You'll enter them in this Google Doc, and then during the half-hour coffee break, the steering committee is going to huddle and try and synthesize those into a list that then we will come back in plenary and discuss as a group and hopefully come to a happy consensus on. Thank you, everybody, for generating several pages of material very quickly there. Well done. So the steering committee huddled next door for, I don't know, about 18 minutes or so, and realized that was not nearly enough time to condense 4 groups worth of recommendations down into individual things. So what we're going to try to do is we'll put up on, we've got one slide each from each of the groups. So there's been a little bit of as needed condensing of what you provided, but not trying to mush things together. And this is going to be a bit of a free-for-all discussion. It may get a little chaotic, but what we're trying to make sure and really get the idea of what are truly the consensus recommendations that then as the steering committee goes into writing the report up, then we'll really boil things down to really specific things. So I'd say let's not get bogged down in wordsmithing. Let's make sure that the points are there. The wordsmithing will happen later. I don't really want to think about 50 people trying to wordsmith. I realize that's what the IPCC does, and I hear it takes a very, very long time to get through a paragraph. And we only have another hour or so. So without further ado, so I was in group 1, which was one of the 2 groups on defining the backbone observing system. And so I won't read off everything here, but for a long-term goal, the big one, we went for big, is really to establish a backbone observing system that captures, at minimum, the mesoscale variability along all of the U.S. coasts, and that we mean from the coastline across the shelf, across the slope, and connecting to the deep ocean, but with fully acknowledging that there will be regional and even local needs to enhance that with even higher resolution sampling. But over the whole thing, really trying to get at that mesoscale circulation so that we're providing the observations needed so that we can have models and reanalyses that are reasonably accurate across the coastal oceans. This is, we certainly are not talking about just physics here. We're talking about far through the biogeochemical and lower trophic levels as we can get, as allowed by the technology, and building, and of course coming up with new technology as it goes. A key part of this to make something, this would be a definite step change. This is, multiplying what we're doing now by some single digit factor, maybe not quite 10, but more than 2. That means, so going with that involves a lot of workforce development. There are not enough of us here now in this room or in the field to do this size scale up. We need to train a lot more people to be able to do this. And so beyond just the collecting observations, we've noted an important thing would be to have ocean forecasters. So very much like we have weather forecasters, a team of ocean forecasters who are producing these probably reanalyses that take all the observations and put them in a nice gridded format that is really the thing that the users are really going to want. Like, there will be cases where people want the individual observations, but the average user is very often going to want to see a nice gridded product that says, this is what the weather of the ocean is today, and it's in the case of climate signals, you're seeing this climate signal is impacting you today. So on the near term, preview of group 2. There were some ideas about how we start moving in that direction, some low-hanging fruit, like further instrumenting existing platforms. For instance, places where there are surface-only buoys, how much can we hang below them at existing sites to augment what we have? Really getting an idea of what we really have already, and putting together products that we can now, like one that came up was mapping out to the best we can the benthic or the near bottom temperatures across the coastal oceans. We've done a lot of this before. This is not the first time we've talked about designing observing systems. So we should go back and look at all of the work again that's been done before. There are many existing plans. There are many model-based experiments that have been run. And the other near term was really we have work to do on centralizing our data and making it more accessible. How are we going to do this? Do we want to discuss on these now and then we'll go to the next one? Or do we want to go through the 4 first? Okay, so Jan, I think you're up.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so is that slide? Yes, okay, so this is take 2 on defining the national backbone observations. All right, so our goal is to link biological and ecological responses to the changing climate, i.e. the physical and chemical climate in the ocean, and impacts from extremes to make it more relevant and useful for society, national defense, and energy security. So in order to do this, we recommended both long-term and short-term recommendations. And incumbent in our long-term recommendations, there are short-term steps to be taken, but these long-term recommendations really have the vision of where we ultimately want to get to. So integrate, enhance, and extend existing onshore observing networks, such as the IOOC regional associations. Dan had that nice slide set of several of the RAs. We want to fill that out and create a national picture augmented with other assets as they are available. So to integrate that with the offshore measurements, such as Ghost Ship or Argo or the ocean acidification buoys, all right? So integrate, enhance, and extend those so that we have a better understanding of the connected system. Enhance the cross and alongshore observations to increase understanding and predictability of the EEZ, so less than 50 kilometers, as well as an emphasis, not to be forgotten, on the near shore, so less than 50-meter isobath, both their dynamics and their reaction to extremes. All right. Near-term recommendations, again, a lot of verbs here. Identify, so that's that map. Maintain and sustain, as well as to connect the backbone, such as buoys, gliders, stations, and profilers, so that we get that subsurface through co-development and co-production. So making sure that we are getting the system that is going to be able to be relevant and useful to society, national defense, energy security, really making sure that we keep an eye not just on our scientific understanding, but on the applications that this needs to do. Increase sustained subsurface, as well as biogeochemical and biological observations. Monitor baseline ecosystems, such as to support the development of things like offshore renewables or experiments with MCDR, et cetera. We need to have that baseline there so that we can make sure that we're doing wise development. And then lastly, develop and sustain state estimates or reanalyses that effectively leverage the existing regional networks to support a national backbone. All right, Dan, you were in that group. Was there anything you would like to underscore?
Just one correction about numbers. You know, it's so hard to get the numbers right. The EEZ goes out to 200 miles, and I do believe that should be a reasonable definition of what we mean by coast.
So that's it for group 2. Thanks.
Group 3. All right, group 3. So we had another very vigorous discussion this morning. Made good use of our 30 minutes. So our group was charged with talking about incorporating societal concerns and local knowledge into climate services at the coast. And so for our guiding long-term vision, our group came up with redefining the ocean observing and user community. So this includes practitioners, could be fishermen. You can come up with any kind of a number of categories here of people that are not traditional ocean observing scientists. And so just acknowledging that this broader community is very valuable, like their perspectives and the observations that they make, whether it be in our sense of a scientific observation or not, but that information is really valuable. And including potentially folks more inland, like we came up with the example of a farmer in Oklahoma, right, who may be making decisions based on an El Nino forecast, right? So it's not just the coastal communities either, or folks that we're targeting in terms of our users. And then bringing these not just scientists consistently into the decision-making process for sure. So that's kind of our big long-term guiding vision. In terms of the short term, what do we do now? What can we work on now? We kind of touched on this morning a little bit after David's talk, but identifying mechanisms to expand the advisory and oversight within IOOC to non-federal stakeholders. I know that's difficult to do in terms of the IOOC itself, but can there be sort of an umbrella or maybe a parallel sort of advisory board that includes other types of input, especially for the development of this decadal plan and getting non-scientists involved into the decadal plan and their user perspectives. And then a couple more here. Just one was developing a standardized mechanism to capture and share regional user and stakeholder needs and requirements. This could be through a database, maybe reports, but we need to clarify these national priorities and find overlap between the different regions and how we can be more efficient and also find those areas of overlap and collaboration. And I thought this was a good idea too from a member of our group, which is to establish metrics for the success of that sort of effort. So maybe it's something like as I was just sitting here looking at these words again, like a map of just like, where are the places that have been engaged? And do we have good coverage around the coastline of the US, for example, for this sort of engagement? Are we doing a good job of getting everybody in everybody's perspective? Let's see, the last one here, strengthening collaboration and coordination between agencies, sort of this cross-agency sort of idea, but needing a national plan to identify who are the key members of the community that we can reach out to and get their input. And then actively engaging with Sea Grant and CPO to sort of facilitate some of this.
And group 4.
Okay, group 4. Yeah. really enjoyed our discussions here today. And we did not break these out by short-term and long-term recommendations. There's actually facets of both that you could probably apply to any one of these bullet points. So we'll let you make your own assignments as we go forward here. But as you've heard earlier today, identify where overlapping observing efforts are critical for a resilient ocean observing system. And that can be, the corollary to that is also having an eye to where some things are redundant and don't need to be redundant. But keeping an eye on the observations that are critical and making sure that they're really observed through the vagaries of funding and other things that can impact storms, natural events, other things. Establishing some sort of cross-agency detail program seems to be a useful and fairly low-hanging fruit type of activity. Similarly, an IARPIC type coordinating committee for other places around the nation's coasts. Developing and implementing a framework to transition research-based observing networks to operational networks. And there's a, this would take a lot of discussion amongst the various agencies because some agencies are not necessarily tasked with doing operational work and maintain some of these networks already. So we understand that there's some pretty big asks involved with some of these. Stepping forward to the role of commercial entities, there's a few specific recommendations here to develop and improve interagency non-negotiable. Non-negotiable is really the key focus of the sentence here, requirements for new commercial contracts for data sharing, data quality, protocols, developments, and algorithms so that that maximum public benefit can be derived. Also increasing funding towards data curation, rescue, stewardship, creating value-added products for existing model results and data. We think that all of these have plenty of room for robust commercial engagement. And then finally, transitioning from research to operations. Both of these bullets have to do with capacity, enhancing our capacity. So investing in workforce capacity expansion, starting at the undergraduate level, perhaps through certificates that don't require graduate level degrees to help maintain, service the ocean observing systems that we do have, and supporting innovation. Maybe this is technology incubators that might lead to advances and eventual commercialization. So I know we do know that some of these efforts are going on, but they'd be worthwhile places to put some more concentration. So yeah, thank you. That's group 4.
Great. And that was all the groups. Yeah. So momentarily, I guess we'll open it up for discussion. I'll just say, I think it's reassuring that from 4 groups tasked to come up with recommendations separately, we have a fair bit of overlap in the recommendations. That's a good sign. That's what we certainly hoped would happen. It's a good sign that we have consensus starting to form. So with that, Mike looks like he's itching to jump out of his seat. So open us up, Mike.
So yeah, to start over, really appreciate that attention was given in the breakouts to the needs for data and serving the data and having it be open access and particularly these points about data sharing and requirements by federal agencies because they, of course, are in the position of setting those requirements and being non-negotiable about it. One of the things in terms of this workforce capacity, I think that is something that's potentially, when we talk about the resource needs, seeing this emphasized across the groups is really important, and amalgamating that in the final report will be important. The intersection of workforce capacity and data, though, I think wasn't necessarily articulated in any of the slides. So I just want to say that we want to be sure to capture the needs for dedicated staff for maintaining the data infrastructure needed to support the endeavor.
Hi, Alex Harper from CENCUS. So just a second for the workforce development and particularly the certificate programs. It's something we hear that students want, particularly from these underserved communities. We're at IOOC trying to get creative about how to produce these where we don't have to go through university necessarily. for the backbone group, I'm curious if there is an opportunity to describe a build out plan, right? This is sort of describing what exists and then this national framework, but was there any discussion around event response or these like mobile observing systems where you can really attack a problem or a system, constrain it, model it, and then move it potentially, you know, these short-term efforts to sort of layer on top of a backbone system. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll respond a little to that. I think you said the first part of my answer right there at the end of that is very much a way to augment the backbone system. And it did come up in some of one of the group discussions that in addition to having a sort of fixed, sustained backbone system, it would be helpful to have a reserve of additional assets that can be surge deployed, for instance, into as needed areas for events. So that did come up. It apparently didn't make it onto one of the high level recommendations here, but.
I'd like to comment on workforce development. It's a topic that we discussed recently at the Underwater Glider Workshop. And there is an effort going on right now at MTS to do micro certifications. And MTS is actually the Marine Technology Society, is actually a very sensible place to have such certifications. So it actually is outside the academic system. It's through the MTS. And I think they're actively looking for people to support these certifications. Basically what they need are groups to put on classes that then the MTS will certify, and then there will be, you know, real certifications given backed up by the MTS. So I think that's, you know, potentially one of the approaches.
I'm going to ask a question to the audience out of curiosity. Who would identify as a biologist or a biological oceanographer? Raise your hand. Yeah. I would add myself to that. And our goals are about biodiversity and ecosystem, and don't have many people in the room. And I think the recommendations for observations might be reflective of platforms that are more suitable to measuring physical and chemical signals than biological signals.
Can you flick to slide 2?
Yes.
I agree with your point, and I want to say that was a big part of our discussion. We have ecosystem observations in here in a few places and biological observations, and we think it's incredibly important. So thank you for that.
Yeah, on that goal, and I see an and after here, after the physical and chemical, that says impacts to extremes. And the way that this is worded, it might give the impression that you're looking at the biological and ecological response to extremes. I just want to call out that I guess I would ask how many people work on sea level in the room. Well, we have a small group. So I think that it can be true that we don't have that strong of representation in any one of these science areas. However, yeah, I think when we look at coastal impacts, not only extremes, but just our state estimate, right? Our daily measurements of sea level, for example, that there's user communities, coastal resilience officers and the like that aren't, and there's an intersection with the biological response as well with sea level. However, that's not the main driver for those kinds of uses. So just in terms of the goal here, maybe we need to refine it a little bit or play with it. But I think this captures the key elements.
I think you brought up a really excellent point, and we don't have that in there. I think we were also captivated by Seth's wording in the plenary, about linking it to the, organisms, things that people care about. But people really care about when their homes are getting flooded. So we need to capture that. So point well taken. Thank you, Mike.
Ed, go for it.
Hi, Ed Dever here, again, Oregon State University. Just to respond a little bit to Camille, I guess I think back to David Legler's first bullet, which was establishing system requirements. And I think about system requirements should be kind of design agnostic, right? So because we already have some existing systems, it's pretty natural to think about those systems and how they would contribute to a future optimized, climate observing system. But if we do take a step back and we think about, okay, well, what are the real requirements that we want to do, and maybe establish those requirements first before going right to the technologies that we want to talk about. I think Uwe Zend had a nice comment about, if we're interested in getting cross-shelf variability of temperature or any other variable, there might be one way to do it further offshore. There might be another way to do it further inshore. But first, we just say what the requirement is. In terms of some of the non-traditional potential observing systems, I will say that I have a couple concerns, and one of them is limiting bias in sampling, right? So if we want to sample, we want to do it uniformly or randomly, and some of the systems that we might think about identifying, like a commercial fishing vessel, are certainly not going to do that. And so thinking about those roles versus some of these other systems, which we could probably do, I think is worthwhile. And we got the rest of my thought train, so I'll leave it at there. But I guess starting off with the system requirements maybe, and then kind of going to some of these other things.
Thanks, Janet, AOML. I just wanted to follow up on the something from our group, the metrics comment, and how we're quantifying our success with this optimization project. And some other things that have happened in the past are like goals for MPAs, for example, and perhaps there's some sort of tangible number in terms of reaching decision-making actionable science that would be useful as a metric to come out of this. We want to increase by X% of our case studies or users or community expansion. Maybe there's something there. I don't know.
That might be a good action for the IOOC task team, which you're on, to establish those metrics.
Other comments? Additional recommendations? Recommendations that are totally wrong and need to be stricken and not see the light of day?
So if you go to, I think it was group 3 that dealt with modeling, and yeah, that was earlier. That was the other breakout. Yeah, so I was just trying to figure out, where does modeling come through in these recommendations? And it might be implied in here in some ways, but it might also be helpful to include some specific modeling deliverables in the short and long term. And let's think about the development and use of evaluation of reanalysis products, the evaluation of our ability to understand the teleconnections from the larger global system, and perhaps downstream in its longer term project or emphasis, the use of the models for evaluating the observing system design itself. So OSSEs and the like, and data withholding experiments and things of that nature. So those came up in the discussions yesterday afternoon. It'd be nice to see recommendations that target that as well.
I think that's a good, I think that's a really good point. We talked about reanalysis in our breakout, but we didn't capture some of the wonderful things that came out from that modeling, just forecast models alone. And that, I agree, should be part of, in my opinion, well, this says backbone observations, but if we think about backbone, it should definitely be part of the backbone, and observations to support those, right?
Right. And as we're talking about that, so it's really about the integration too, of the use of the observations in situ, along with satellite remote sensing, Michelle. And models become very useful in synthesizing the two and producing products that someone had mentioned earlier, the value of the gridded product for many of the users, end users. So maybe finding some place to emphasize that.
And we in my group, in group 1, we did have some discussion about how to use models in the observing system design process. And one way is to define a metric that you want to optimize the system for, and that will give you an answer. Another way, but that will be a specific answer for that specific metric. So I threw out that maybe a more practical way to approach that is to say, given this proposed design for say a national coastal observing system, we can ask models then, how much better is this than what we have now for all these different kinds of questions we can ask, rather than trying to optimize for one specific thing. We can do a lot better for a lot of things instead of.
Yeah, so I was in this group and we had a lot of great discussion, but I think this topic about modeling is relevant here because a lot of the discussion was, how to engage new communities and some discussion about the more hyper-local observing needs that might come with that. I think there's a challenge we're going to be facing soon as we do more kind of hyper-local observing that we haven't really grappled with yet, which is whether and how to sustain those systems. And, and one approach might be we do sort of a time-limited deployment of hyperlocal sensors, whether they're water level or others, but we use that to calibrate and improve models. And then over time, we sort of peel back redundant sensors. So this may be getting a little weedy and a little tactical, but I think there is a connection perhaps between broadening the community of users, trying to serve more users, particularly at very fine scales along the shoreline, and over time, the increasing importance of models if we can't meet the costs and logistics of really high resolution sensor networks. I don't know, or maybe we'll figure it out. Maybe we'll develop economies of scale and local funding mechanisms that let us keep those sensors going. But I think we need to have an eye to models playing a bigger role.
And I'll just build off of that. I don't think it's weedy at all for this climate signal discussion. In fact, in California, this is exactly how we're getting at the coastal flooding inundation topic, is that we're deploying this swarm observing system that includes drones, webcams, in situ sensors, to build a model for a very local region. For a few years, you do these deployments, and then you move to another sort of priority region. And so I feel like this concept is super relevant if we want to get at some of these climate phenomena a little better. Maybe building off of this flooding and inundation topic and going back to our discussion in group 3 about reaching new communities and these inland communities in the interior part of the US. It's not just folks at the coast who are getting flooded from climate change. And also thinking about these ocean forecasters and sort of the communication strategy of like how we might use these improved ocean forecasts, working with perhaps the National Weather Service and through the Weather Act to get an improved understanding of how essential these ocean measurements and models are to our daily weather predictions.
Just a thought, if you could go back to slide 1. Oops. Yeah, I think one way to finesse this maybe, Mike, is if we think about the observing system, I know it says observing, but it's observing, it's modeling, it's information integration, it's data management, right? And if that could be explicit in here, then we kind of finesse that a bit. And I know some of the previous efforts to try and describe the observing system was that the observations were in service to the models, which were ultimately the product that we were thinking we were going to deliver. And so that it's the observations are there to keep the model right, but it's to give us that gridded product that's the most valuable tool for developing other information that can be used by decision makers.
Any final comments?
It may not be unrelated, not related to this thing, but I have a very stupid question. It's about like, we are assuming that we are looking for the funding from Congress to sustain this observation network, right? So my question is that I have seen in the highways and roads where the people can sponsor the, the roads and highways. Can we do something like that in our observing networks? Like just name that particular mooring under one's name, so you will get funding, but there is that ease of funding opportunity. So yeah, thanks.
Adopt the glider transect sounds great to me. I think, not maybe more broadly, funding sources beyond the federal government, we should definitely be looking into. I think in one group, somewhere in one of the many group discussions, philanthropic support did come up. Others know a little more, but often what those groups tend to do is they will sponsor something that gets something going. They want to do that impactful thing right now that then can be picked up down the road. So it might be development of some new widget that makes for a whole new way to do the observing. And that seems under the most models that we have now, seems to be how the philanthropic support for this kind of work comes in. That being said, there's some people with a whole lot of money in the world, if they ever got really interested.
I think what Robert said has been my experience, is that foundations and philanthropic, they're good for, like, say, funding creation of a buoy or an asset or a thing. But it's the sustaining. That's the hard money to come by, because they don't want to make an ongoing commitment. Their board may change. They may go out of business. Who knows, right? And it's that sustaining dollars. That's the most difficult thing to get, in my experience. But like Robert said, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be exploiting that opportunity to get things, right? So.
All right. So I think we'll take that as folks are fairly happy with these sets of recommendations. And so as mentioned, it'll be the steering committee in the next weeks and maybe hopefully not many months, will condense all this down to a report. So I'm going to pause 1 second and get some different slides that will take us to the finish line. So 2.5 days, here we are. So we'll keep this brief. So just first a reminder of what we said on Monday, what our goals were. We said we were going to try to identify opportunities to accelerate the co-design and optimization of the observing system for coastal climate signals, that we were going to try to bridge gaps between the global climate research and the more regional operational oceanography that many of us focus on at the coast. We were going to try to foster collaborations between many different stakeholders, and ultimately to deliver a set of recommendations to the IOOC task team. And I'd say we've done a reasonable job over the last 2.5 days of really making a good dent at all those objectives. So good job, everybody. So just some quick high-level takeaways from the workshop. I'll say most of these were genned up around 5 o'clock this morning. So it's when all the magic happens. First of all, I think we all very much agree, coasts are where where society experiences the effects of climate, the changing climate of the ocean. And to really define all of those coastal climate signals, we really need broad engagement. The climate signal means something very different to very different people in different places with different interests. So it's really important to talk to all the various stakeholders, not just a bunch of scientists. As we saw initially, we all come up with very sciencey climate signals that are certainly important, and just maybe not so important to your friends and family who don't speak our special languages. Building trust and relationships with those stakeholder communities is really, really important. That's those, especially when we really realize that those communities, thinking of things like fishing communities, they're the ones that really have the power with Congress to get money. Having that relationship with them, having them on our side, is really an important ticket to making progress. I think we went through a lot of gap identification. I think it's safe to say that our observing system that we have now is able to capture some coastal climate signals, but not nearly all. There are many gaps. We identified a lot of those gaps. Probably not. I'm sure there are gaps in our gap analysis. I think hopefully we all agree that a step change in our observing capacity along the coast is needed to detect coastal climate signals. That really further incremental advances, while good, really aren't going to cut it. It's getting to be time for something big. And that development and synthesis of these data products, so particularly things like reanalyses, is really, really important for achieving the societal support that we need to get the big investments. And then one other slide, just to point out that really what's old is new. So these are, we've pitched some various kinds of potential designs of a whole national observing system for the coast. We are definitely not the first. The first panel here is a map that was drawn in the 2003 Autonomous and Lagrangian Platforms and Sensors report. Actually looks like something that's in large part now realized, but it's an array along the West Coast with pretty good resolution. The other panel is from a paper that Harvey led 15 years ago, with a design that to me looks like it has some sustained transects based on mobile and fixed platforms, spaced something on the order of a Rossby radius apart along the coast. And gee, that sounds a lot like what came up in Mission. So what's old is new, but maybe we're getting to the time where sadly the crises are mounting enough that the momentum might be there to actually implement something like this nationally. So what do we do next? So this workshop is clearly not the end. The first thing is the steering committee will draft and publish a workshop report. We'll be sharing those recommendations, particularly with publicly, of course, but particularly with the IOOC Coastal Climate Signal Task Team. We expect we'll end up doing briefings to a few groups. One is the US CLIVAR interagency group that's made up of similar mix of agencies as the IOOC task team, as well as all of the IOOC RAs. Several of them are obviously represented in the room and even on the workshop steering committee. And then we didn't mention much about it, but there's also existing now a US CLIVAR working group that's focused on coastal solutions. And it's really that group, it's led by Manu Di Lorenzo, is really focused on coastal climate services with really a modeling emphasis. But I think you can all imagine how that might relate pretty closely to the things we've been talking about. A little bit longer term, we have plenty of work to do, continuing with the co-design efforts and let's hope ultimately implementation of a much expanded coastal observing system. And we've come up with a number of near-term action items that point us in the direction of those long-term goals. So brings us to the obligatory thank you slides. Lots of people have been involved in making this happen. I think the steering committee that's here present is all up here on the stage. Thank you, everybody. Nat online, thank you. And actually, I believe Tommy's been online as well. And Manu couldn't make it. Our program organizing committee, Mike, Alyssa, Nick, Cassie, thank you. Keeping all this, made all this work, kept us fed. Travel coordinators as well, for those of us that got travel support. Very nice. Folks in the back, thank you for making all this work. I know it's not easy keeping all this hybrid going. And everybody else, great job, awesome input. And don't forget all the lovely agencies that supported this. Thanks.